Hi, I'm Brandon Steenbach, staff minister here at St. Mark Ministries. And this is a series about how we as Christians can respond to the challenge that Christianity is intolerant to the LGBT community. Because you hear it all the time that Christians are intolerant, bigoted, and hateful, that we have mistreated and hurt people in the LGBT community with our resistance to their desire to marry, and with our message about what the Bible has to say about that lifestyle. There may be some truth to some of this. I think as Christians that we have not always known how to respond in love, and maybe we've not always really said what the Bible actually says about this. So in this series, I want to equip you to be able to speak the truth in love. But more than just giving you talking points, I want to help you develop the ability to listen well, to have a true heart of compassion for the hurting, and to understand the depth of what God has created with marriage and sexuality so that we can respond from a truly biblical standpoint. Now, to start with, we have to just understand when somebody gives us this challenge, we got to know, who are we really talking to? That is, am I talking with somebody who has heard a lot of this messaging in the world around us, but maybe hasn't really experienced anything in their own life, but they're concerned about the Christian world that they've maybe grown up in? For instance, our own young church members who are maybe growing up and hearing from their school that it's really important to be affirming and accepting and tolerant, but when they come to church, they don't necessarily feel that that's the case. Or are we talking about somebody who has been hurt, whose own life is a pattern of hearing all the time from their Christian friends, family, and so on, that they just don't live the right way? Okay, we have to understand who we are talking to before we can really know how to respond, because there might be different responses for each. But no matter what, we have to start with a couple of foundational ideas. See, there are two passages that I like to go to when it comes to how we respond to any challenge to the Christian faith. And the first is James chapter 1, verses 19 to 20, where James writes this: "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Have you ever seen it happen where somebody hears a challenge to their faith, and the first thing they do is they just go off, they just start talking, and they maybe even get a little bit angry, a little hot under the collar as they're responding, almost as though they're offended that anybody would question the truth of Christianity. Now, the question that I would ask is, does that help somebody understand better who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for them? Or does that anger just make that Christian look like they can't handle a challenge to their own faith? So as Christians, we really want to develop the ability to listen well. When somebody gives us a challenge, we want to be able to ask the question, what do you mean by that? And so when James says, be quick to listen, think about the people in your life that you would define or you would describe as quick to listen. What were they like? What are some of the things that they did that showed that they were willing to listen to you? If you've ever had the experience of starting to talk and you realized that this person is really hearing what you have to say, what did they do to make that work for you? Now, James also says that we need to be slow to speak. Have you ever found yourself hearing somebody talk and in your head you're thinking about how you're going to respond to them as they're talking? You're probably not able to really hear what they have to say as soon as you start doing that, right? Once you start thinking about what you're going to say to them, you've stopped listening to what they're saying to you. So this is something that I often tell people when they're trying to learn these communication skills, especially if I'm working with young engaged couples as they're getting ready for marriage. Is I always say, one of the finer arts of listening is believing that you will be changed by what you hear. See, if I believe that I'll be changed by what I hear, if I believe that my mind could be changed, my heart could be affected, or that something that I hear will actually make me think about the world in a different way, I'm much more likely to spend the time listening rather than trying to respond. Now then, James also says slow to become angry. And once again, if you get angry at somebody because they challenged your faith, that's not going to help you witness to them. And so it's very important that we have to listen well to another person and take our own emotions kind of out of the picture for a while. The other passage I like to go to is 1 Peter 3, verse 15, where Peter writes, "In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." Now, there are really three things that Peter is giving us there in that passage. First is to revere Christ as Lord, means to let Christ be the master of our lives. And more than that, to look at him as the ultimate example for how we respond to other people. Think about the way that Jesus handled people who, in his society, were considered sinners. The people who maybe fell into specific activities, lifestyles, and yeah, some of those were sinful, and yet those were considered worse sins than others. And so they were considered outcasts, they were exiled, they were put on the periphery. How did Jesus treat them? We see in some of the stories of Jesus' life that he reached out to them. He cared about them. He listened to them. He spent time with them. If you remember, for instance, the story of Matthew, the tax collector, who became one of Jesus' disciples. When Jesus first met him, he went over to his house. He had a meal with him and a lot of Matthew's friends, most of whom were probably other tax collectors and other sinners in that society. In fact, the religious people were really upset that Jesus was eating with these sinners. And so obviously he was willing to spend time with them and to appear as though he cared about their lives. So we want to do the same thing. We want to revere Christ as Lord to the extent that we say, "Lord, help me to be like you in the way that I treat other people." Now, number two here is he says, be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. Now, the important part about this is that Peter is not saying that we always have to have a perfectly well-crafted argument as to why somebody's life might be sinful, or a perfectly well-crafted argument to say how somebody is wrong about their opinion about what God thinks. Rather, we have to be ready to give an answer to the hope that we have. That is the gospel. And so it's very important that as we talk about our faith with people, that we focus on the gospel. We be ready to point them to Jesus and to the gospel. Not just that we prove them wrong or that we show them how awful their life is, but that we be able to show them who Jesus is. Okay, that's an important task for us as Christians. And that's one of the things that we're going to try and do in this series as well. Now, number three, Peter says to do this with gentleness and respect. If you look at John chapter 1, as you read about who Jesus is and how he came into the world, one of the things that it says that he came to reveal the glory of the Father, that he came full of grace and truth, that he held both together. And truth is important. We don't want to downplay the truth. But if we don't also have grace, we're going to run into issues. The theologian Warren Wiersbe once said that truth without love is brutality. Love without truth is hypocrisy. In other words, if we don't have the two together, we're going to have a real problem. And so, as Peter says here, if we're going to speak the truth, we have to do so with gentleness and respect. Calling people names or telling them that they are foolish, they don't know anything, they're brainless, they're idiots, that kind of stuff. Things that I've heard people say, heard Christians say. I don't think that those things are going to advance the argument very well. They're certainly not going to lead somebody closer to Christ. And so we want to understand how gentleness and respect look in the way that we talk about our faith and about what God says about this specific issue. Gary Habermas, the professor of apologetics at Liberty University and a well-known apologetics author, has said that 80% of people who object to Christianity do so for emotional reasons, not intellectual ones. What that means is that we don't actually have an information problem. Our goal really actually isn't to show somebody what the Bible says about this, but to help them to understand and believe what God really is doing when he gives us marriage and sexuality. In other words, to help somebody see that this gets to the heart of the gospel. This isn't just about downloading information to their brains. This is about helping them to see the grace of God and understand his heart more clearly. So, as an exercise in learning how to listen, in the notes for this video, you're going to find a link to a story. And it's a story that I wrote for somebody else. This is a friend of mine who had confided in me for a long time over the years of her life, a struggle that she had in high school. When she, in high school, had had a secret lesbian relationship with somebody. And she hid it from family and friends and struggled herself with whether this was something that she could resolve with her faith, how she could hold in tension her faith in Jesus in this relationship that had become important to her. And as I worked with her, I helped her to understand kind of that experience and to move past it into a new way of looking at her life. But reading that story will help you to see the struggle that maybe some people in your life have. Maybe you know somebody who, unknown to you or to anybody else, is dealing with this and is looking for somebody they can share with about it, somebody that they can talk to about their struggle so that they know that they'll still be loved even if they have to make some difficult decisions. So I want you to go and read that story and then just think about a few things. First of all, just to, as you read it, make some observations to yourself. What's standing out to me? What jumps out of here? What is challenging to me? What's difficult for me to hear? And next, maybe take a moment to find where's the turning point in the story? Where do things change? Where did the grace of God interrupt the life of this person and start to bring a new way of thinking? And finally, put yourself in the story. Imagine that maybe you are this person, or maybe this person is somebody you love dearly. And think about how you would speak to her. What would you say? Why would you say it? That's all for this session, and we'll see you next time as we get to talking about the sacredness of sex.